Hi there, thanks for joining me. In this video, I'm going to do a painting of a mountain that's reflected in a lake, and I'm going to show you step by step how you can paint along with me. So I don't exactly know what I'm going to do. I have an idea of what I want to paint, but I don't exactly know the finer details of it. I'm just going to kind of show you how I make things up from my imagination and how you can too. So we'll just start with a blank canvas here, which is 14 inches wide by 11 inches tall, and it's at 72 dpi. And normally I would make my canvas a little bit bigger than that if this was something I was planning on printing, but since I'm just doing this for a video, I'm going to make it pretty small. But you could use something like 150 dpi or 300 dpi for your prints. So first thing that we'll do is we'll make a new layer. You know me, I like to make a lot of layers here. This will be our sky layer, and of course we'll use the paint bucket to fill the sky. That's the fastest way to fill just a solid color. And when I'm picking colors for the sky here, generally if it's a daytime sky, which it is here, and it's going to be a blue sky, we want somewhere kind of between indigo and cyan. You don't want a green sky and you don't want a purple sky in this case, so anywhere in there is fine. Sometimes I'll kind of hunt around and put down a color, and if I see something I like, I'll stick with it. In this case I got lucky, but let's say I did something like this and I didn't want it to be as moody. You know, I could obviously brighten it a little bit by going up and to the right in my color picker, and then we get a brighter color. So I think something like that will work. And then we're going to use the digital airbrush to do some shading on this sky to make it look more realistic. So let's add our darker color towards the top. So we're going to shift our hue more towards indigo, and we're going to darken it and saturate it a little bit more. And I'm hitting tab on my keyboard to make my palettes go away so we don't accidentally hit them. And then I'm just going to use kind of medium pressure to light pressure as I go down towards the bottom to make a soft tapering effect here, where the color just kind of fades. One color fades into the other. And I've got my opacity set pretty low here, so you'll want your brush to be like that too, otherwise it won't work properly. Then we'll do some lighter area towards the bottom here, and so we'll go the opposite way with our hue towards cyan. And of course we'll lighten it in value. We'll put in some lighter blue here. And we'll lighten it some more. Don't want to use white, but pretty close to white. So where this lightest area here is, I'll draw a little example line here. This is about where our horizon will be. So this is kind of where we want our lightest area of the sky to be in this type of painting. So our horizon will be right around here. Now this is just, you know, one way to paint a sky. There's lots of other different skies out there. You know, it depends on where the sun is and what's going on and what part of the world you live in, but this is kind of an average sky that we're going to do today. The main focus is going to be on the mountain and the reflection, so we won't really do too much here besides this. Let's make a new layer, and we're going to put our mountains in here. The first thing let's decide where our horizon's going to be for sure, and we'll just put that in. So to do that, let's use the custom Scratchboard tool, and we'll sample by holding Alt on our keyboard one of these middle sky colors here. We'll just shift it a little bit towards gray, maybe shift it towards indigo a little bit. And this is just going to be some really distant hills back here. You're not really going to see much of it. And we can even just set the blend mode to multiply in this case. That's going to change the color a little bit, but that's okay. We'll take down the opacity of it. And then we'll use the Diffuse Blur blender to soften the edges so they're not so smooth and they look more distant if you do this. And the bottom edge of this doesn't matter too much, but we'll blend it a little bit just so it's not so sharp there. Okay, so we've got something in the distance, and then let's lighten the bottom of it a little bit. We'll also turn on preserve transparency here to make sure that we can't paint outside of this, and we'll sample this lightest color here of our sky, and we will paint in some of the bottom here to kind of blend it together and lighten it a little bit. Okay, so we got our horizon kind of defined here. Next thing that we'll do is we'll make a mountain. I'm just calling it MTN. Just there's no reason to really type in long descriptive names here. You just need to know, you just need to be able to look at it and know what it is. So for our mountain, we'll pick a dark color here, and we'll use our palette knife. We'll also turn on color variability a little bit, and we'll do a little test stroke here and see if we have something we like. Now, first of all, we probably should make our opacity a little bit stronger so we get something like this. I think that looks good for our mountain color. So now we decide where our mountain's going to be. I think it's going to be right here. Maybe something like this. And you can of course use a larger brush diameter to fill this in a little faster. You want to get it pretty opaque. You don't want to really be able to see through it too much if you can help it. We want to take it right about down to a little bit below this horizon line here. Something like that I think will work. And then we'll go ahead and use the just add water brush. That'll kind of soften the bottom and drag the color out as well. Kind of just pulling down on it. Something like that will work. And then let's do this. Let's right click on the mountain layer, and we'll do select layer content, and that'll put a selection around our mountain here. We'll make a new layer, and we will call it HL, and this will be our highlights. And we're gonna hide our selections with Control-Shift-H to just hide that selection. And then we will use the square chalk brush, and let's pick a nice paper texture here. Let's try simulated wood grain. We'll turn our paper scale up and our paper contrast up. And we'll pick a color for our mountain here, maybe a light blue. Make sure color variability is not going too crazy here by setting it pretty low. We'll do a test stroke and see if we get something we like. That might work. Not quite as thick as I want it to be though. Let's try a different texture. Worn pavement. That's a little bit better. Let's set my opacity a little higher too. Let's set our opacity to 40. Let's see if this works. Okay. So when we're painting mountains, of course, we want to kind of divide each peak. So that's kind of a peak, and this is kind of a peak. And this is a peak here. So they each need to have a highlight side and a shadow side. So let's say that our highlight is going to be coming, our sun's going to be on the right side here. So that's where our highlight's going to be. So what we want to do is we want to make strokes like this that kind of start out vertical and end up horizontal. So from vertical to horizontal, but with a little bit more finesse than that. So we'll do something like this. You want this texture to be here when you're painting with this brush, so if you're having trouble with that, you might have to play with your settings a little bit up here and in here, and you can try different papers for this. There's a lot of different textures that'll work. You can use more than one paper texture too if you want. But again, you'll notice I'm more or less keeping all my highlights going one similar direction on one similar side. And it's going to make them look more consistent. And then we'll put in some shadow color. Let's make a new layer. So this will be our shadow side. So let's sample our sky color here. We'll shift a little bit towards gray. Let's see if this works. I think that's a good shadow color. Maybe we could go towards indigo a little bit more. Yeah, I like that better. And our shadows, of course, go in the opposite direction of our highlights. Still following the same contour of the mountain, same angles. So we get something like that. Then we can blend a little bit. But before we do that, let's go ahead and fuse these layers all together into the same layer. So we'll select the shadow through the mountain by holding Shift, and we'll do a Control E to merge them. And now we've got our mountain on a single layer. Now we can start blending it. Let's do a Control D to deselect any selection that might be active, and then we'll turn on Preserve Transparency, and we'll use the coarse oily blender to do our blending. Now we might have to change our paper settings here. Let's see what we get when we start painting. That's no good. So we're gonna have to change it a little bit. Let's switch our paper texture to basic paper. Turn our paper scale up and a paper contrast. That's a little bit better. So we want there to be these streaks when we're blending, because if you're not getting that and you're getting something like this where it's just kind of smudging it all together too much, that's not going to be very helpful. So you want there to be texture while you're blending. So we'll go through and we'll blend following these curves, and do your highlights separate from your shadows. Oops, and if you end up, you gotta be careful, because if you paint from the outside of your shape in, you'll get this white, and that will kind of ruin things, so watch out for that. May have to use a smaller brush to get in there and really blend this. Then you should have something kind of like this, more or less. Zoom out a little bit to see how it looks. Make sure it looks like a mountain. Then we'll add another layer of highlights here. So let's go ahead and use the square chalk brush again. We can use the same paper. Let's use an almost white color. We'll add in some more highlights here. Make it look like there's snow on this mountain. It's pretty good. I'll blend it some more using the coarse oily blender again. And you can really get in and get crazy with this too, and start kind of changing up the contours and angles a little bit. I'm kind of tapping and dragging. I'm varying the angle of my brush strokes a little bit, but not too much to really ruin it. You can just kind of get in there and blend it however you see fit to make it look a little more like it's got a little more character to it. Something like that. And then let's lighten the bottom of this. So let's sample one of our light sky colors here, and we'll use the airbrush to go through and lighten the bottom. so that it kind of comes together. I want the bottom to look like it just kind of fades into nothing almost. And we could do some blending here with the Diffuse Blur blender. So we want to do very light pressure, and we want to follow these contours of the brush strokes that we made. It's pretty subtle. You want to go in one direction with the shadows and then in the opposite direction with the highlights, and it's a very light blending. You don't want to really tear anything up too much. You just want to slightly blend it. And it's going to look more distant that way. Okay. Zoom out and see how we're looking. That's looking pretty good. Sometimes you can go through, and we'll try this, I don't know if it'll look good or not, but if you want to use the pinch brush too, you can tighten up some details here. Same thing with the distorto too, if you wanted to kind of scoot some stuff around, you can. Let's go ahead and merge this mountain with the horizon and the sky layer. Sometimes you can keep layers separate, and sometimes you can fuse them together. It kind of depends on what you feel like doing. If you think that you might want to change some things later, you probably want to keep your layers separate, but otherwise it's okay to move forward and merge things together. And I know I'm not going to do anything else to the sky or to these background hills, and anything else that I do to the mountain, you know, I can put on a new layer. So I'm just going to merge these layers together into a single layer. We'll just call it BG for background, since it's just all one layer. And the reason why I want to do that is because I want to be able to blend my mountain edges here with the background a little bit. So I'm going to use the blur brush and just kind of lightly go along the edges here to soften them so that they're not so sharp and harsh. Go along the edge of that background hill a little bit too. Maybe we'll blur a little bit towards the base. I'm gonna get something like that. Our mountain looks a little more realistic now. So now we're gonna make some ground in front of it, and then we'll put some water on top of that, and we'll reflect the mountain into the water. So we'll make a new layer. Call it grass. This will just kind of be a field of grass. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not really looking at an image. I don't have anything pre-planned here. I just kind of am going for it in painting, and that's how I create a lot of my landscape paintings. It's just by making them up from my imagination. It's really just a combination of all these techniques that I'm showing you in these videos that will help you paint all these different natural objects that you can bring together in your own compositions. So with the digital airbrush, I'm going to put in some grass, and I kind of want this to look distant, so that's why I'm using the airbrush for this. It's just going to look more wispy, and when you get up towards the mountain, keep it pretty light. And when you get into the foreground, you can do it more opaque. Something kind of like this. Blend it into the mountain just a little bit so it kind of looks like there's trees or grass or something growing on it. I mean, this is just a big field of grass. It's very, we're really far away from this mountain at this point. If we want to make the mountain look a little further back too, we can do that. We can go back to the background layer, which is, the mountain and the sky together, sample the sky color here, and then use the airbrush to kind of go over it lightly. That'll push it back a little bit further, because I think it looks a little bit too close for me. That's better. Let me lighten the base of it a little bit too. There we go. Now that all blends in better. Back to our grass layer. Let's darken the color a little bit and shift it more towards green, darker green, and then darken the foreground, darken it a little bit more. We get something like this. Okay, we've got a nice distant field of grass here. So in front of that, let's decide where we're going to put our lake. And we can make our lake our sky color, because our lake's just going to be reflecting everything around it. So let's put our lake maybe somewhere in here like this. So this is kind of an aerial view. Maybe you're up on top of a mountain, or you're in an airplane, or, you know, kind of looking at it from further away. We're not, you know, if we're at the lake, we're at the closer edge to us rather than anywhere near this mountain. So we want all this stuff in the background to look pretty distant. So for our lake, what we can do is we can go ahead and merge the grass to the background layer. So we'll select both those layers using Shift, do a Control E, and now we have this background layer here. And we'll do a select all by doing Control A, and we'll do a copy, and we'll do a paste. And we'll call this ref for reflection, and we'll go to canvas, and we will go, or actually we'll go to edit, and we'll go to flip vertical. So what we've done is we've made a duplicate of the background layer here. So now what we want to do is we want to move it down to where our reflection is going to be, and if we turn down the opacity, we will be able to see through it. And then we also want to move it above the lake layer so that we can see the lake and the reflection simultaneously. So we align the bottom edge of the reflection up with the bottom edge of the mountain, and make sure that it looks good where it is in our lake here. And then we can do a select layer content to select our edges of our lake, go back to the ref layer, do a select invert selection, and then just hit delete, and then do a Control D, and there you go. So what we did is we essentially used this edge of the lake to cut out the shape of the reflection there. So now we've got an instant reflection. We'll have to do a little bit of work to it to get it to look proper, but it's a good start. So on this reflection layer, we'll turn on preserve transparency, and we'll take the diffuse blur, and we'll blend it with very light pressure horizontally across the whole thing, just to kind of blend it up a little bit. We can pull down on it too a little bit, just to kind of blend it. You just want to just fuzz it a little bit. Back to our lake layer, and let's add some definition to our lake here. So let's take our sample our sky color here, and we'll use the airbrush, and we'll go through, and we need to turn down our reflection a little bit too. Go through and just paint in some just different blue colors here and there to change it up. You could even throw in some green here and there. So it looks more like water. I'll zoom in a little bit so we can see it a little closer here. And we're going to need a shoreline. Let's call it shore. Turn off preserve transparency, and we'll pick a kind of dark brown color. Try something like this. We'll use the palette knife for this. I don't think that's dark enough. It needs to be a little darker. And there we go. That'll work. So I'm kind of painting behind this lake layer here, giving it a bit of a shoreline. This helps it kind of look more natural. I'm kind of just deciding this stuff as I'm painting. Again, I'm not looking at a photo or anything. That might make it easier to figure out where to put all this stuff, but painting from a photo is fun. I like to do that too, but in this case, this is something that I just kind of feel like I'm painting without having to come up with an idea first. That can be a lot more enjoyable too than always having to figure out what you're going to do before you do it. Just kind of making it look like there's some different elevations and things going on here, and patches of dirt. Something like that will work. We'll add some highlights to that too, maybe to make it stand out a little more. Take a kind of brown gray here. We'll turn on preserve transparency. And in a couple places we can add some highlights to kind of make it stand out. Look a little more three-dimensional. Okay. It's looking good. Now on top of this lake layer, let's add another layer. Let's call it HL for highlights. You know me, I just like to use short names here. And we'll throw in some kind of light areas here that'll look like water rippling and different highlights on the water. Just keep them on above the lake layer. Don't let them get onto your grass or anything. It looks like that water's kind of moving around and being active. The wind blowing it or something maybe. Something like that. Zoom out and see how it looks. I think it looks okay. I kind of want to maybe darken some areas of it, but I'm not really sure if I want to do that, and I don't really want to ruin anything that I've already done. So we'll make a little test layer here. Let's do a select layer content to make a selection around the lake layer. Hide the selection with Control-Shift-H and make a new layer. Let's do a test here. Let's add some darker color here with the airbrush. We'll see how this looks, because I have a feeling if we darken it, it's going to look a little better. And I think it does. Okay, we got our reflection. I recommend you save periodically too while you're doing this. Normally if I was painting this, I probably would have saved a few different iterations by now. I'm not really too worried about saving this for this video, but you can save different copies. That way if you do change something, or if you flatten some layers and you want to be able to go back and get a previous version of your artwork, you can. This is one of those cases where I feel tempted to do that, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to move forward. I feel tempted because I'm going to do a layers drop all, so now all my layers are gone. And so if I did decide later in this video that maybe I did want to actually change something else about this lake or something, this is kind of the point of no return for me. So I'm going to have to keep moving forward at this point. So I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to test to see if adding some blue here some light blue will help make this all look more distant, and to deselect my selection too. And I'm not sure if that really helps much. It does help a little bit if I add it. Adding this light kind of makes the edge of this lake fade in so it doesn't look so close. And then we'll go back to the canvas layer and let's blur some of this with the blur brush to make it look further away. I don't want it to look like we're standing near the edge of this lake. And then we'll use the coarse oily blender to just kind of maybe blend it a little bit too near this edge to roughen the edge a little bit. That'll help it kind of come together. Yeah, I like that better. I'll go back and blur it some more. Okay, looking more distant now. So now maybe we need to put something in the foreground so that we can establish that there is this distance and that we're standing really far back. So we'll make a new layer. We'll just call it FG for foreground. I don't really know what we're going to put in the foreground. I haven't decided, but I know we're going to put something. And maybe it could just be some ledge or something that we're standing on. Maybe we're up on another mountain peak and we're looking at this peak from across it. See, this way, now that these rocks are here, or whatever this is going to end up being, that really makes it absolutely certain that that lake is now down somewhere on the ground and that we're not standing in front of it. So stuff like that helps when you're composing. You have to think about things like that. You have to try to imagine how people are going to interpret your work and what you're trying to accomplish. You know, if we hadn't put this here, some people might have looked at that and thought that it was just a really big rock or something. You know, it doesn't look like a mountain unless you make it look distant. So we got our foreground rocks. We can add some shading to these by turning on preserve transparency, and we can pick whatever color we want for our rocks. Maybe we'll try something like this and see. It's a little too red. Still too brown. Let's go with something like that. That'll work. So I'm using my loaded palette knife to put in these details. Again, if there are any, depending on how you do your rocks, if there are sides to them, which, you know, there obviously will be, you want to make sure that you put the highlights on one side and the shadows on the other. So I'm just kind of using my imagination here to decide what shape these rocks are going to be. And that's something that you just kind of have to practice. I don't know if I could really explain why I'm making these shapes here. I'm just kind of doing it, and if it looks right, I'll keep it, and if it doesn't look right, I'll change it. But, you know, you just put some kind of fractal shapes in here, and it's probably going to look like rocks without you really having to try too hard. I'm going to sample this brown here so that I can get it back, and I'm going to maybe put some lighter areas here as highlights on these rocks, of course, in the highlight areas. And we could even put some shadows on the rocks in a couple places too to kind of make them come together more. I'll throw some texture over the whole thing, sampling this darker color, and then that'll work. We'll blend it a little bit, like we did with the mountain, using light pressure. And we've got some foreground rocks. Zoom in and see how it looks here. It's looking okay. I think the foreground could be just a little bit darker. I'm going to fix that in a second. I also want to blend this rock because it's kind of standing out to me, not looking right. Using the coarse oily blender for that. That helps a little bit, actually. So we'll darken the foreground now. We'll make a vignette. I'll just call it VIG. It's short for vignette. We'll make that a multiply layer. Pick a nice dark blue. We'll vignette our foreground and our sky a little bit. Kind of help the composition come together, and then we'll take down the opacity so it's not so strong. Okay, that's looking okay. Now maybe, I feel like we need maybe one more thing for this composition. We'll just do a quick tree branch or something, because there's all this kind of wasted space here, and again I kind of want to further establish where the viewpoint is in this painting. Just make another layer, put it below the vignette. We'll call it branch, and this will be good practice in painting branches. So I like to use the custom Scratchboard sometimes, and we can just take almost black here, darker color than this down here at least. You know, just use almost black. And what I like to do is use the Scratchboard rake with heavy to light pressure to make these branches. So I'll zoom in a little bit here. We're going to have our main trunk maybe kind of come up here like this. And it's kind of a technique that you do for painting trees, tree trunks and branches. So your trunk's obviously going to be the thickest branch, and then really tree branches are just a stick that gets thicker to thinner with a bunch of fractals coming off of it. So what I mean by a fractal is it's a repeating shape. So the next stick that comes off of this is going to be a branch, and it's going to be thinner in diameter, but it's still going to taper off in the same way. Now what direction it goes doesn't really matter. That's kind of up to you, but what's important is that it gets thicker to thinner, that it doesn't go from thin to thick, because that's not going to look right, and it doesn't go all thick, because that's not going to look right, and it doesn't go all thin, because that's not going to look right. So you have to go thick to thin. So where it forks off of your main branch, it needs to immediately start getting thinner. So it takes a little bit of a technique here to get this. I'm changing my brush size kind of down each time I move to the next smallest branch, and I'm kind of just putting these in wherever I feel like them. You want there to be a kind of more or less forking like this, where it's every other side gets a branch, kind of, you know, it doesn't have to be that way all the time. And you do want to have some branches that come in front of other branches. It's good to have some branches that come in front of themselves, like that. So you can really just do whatever kind of shapes you want here, as far as the direction and the contour that they go, and it's going to look pretty good as long as you follow just the rules of making the branches look proper. So I could spend a lot of time doing this, and I do, just drawing in these branches. I have yet to find a way to make this faster. I don't think there is. I've tried studying trees and looking at them and tried to make image hose brushes and things that make branches faster, but it's kind of one of those things where there's just, I don't think there's really a shortcut to doing it. Other than this, I guess. I guess this is a shortcut, because you can get the branch all in one stroke. That can be helpful. Just looking at it in the distance to see how it looks. And then I'm not going to go too crazy putting branches on this, but while you're doing this at home, you can just keep following this technique, and you can put a million branches on here if you want, and it's going to look better if you do. But not all trees have to have a ton of branches. Some dead trees that have been out for a while, you know, most of the branches probably broke off, so there can be trees with few branches, you know. You could just have just a couple, 2 or 3, and that would probably look fine and look more like a stump or a trunk, but, you know, maybe that's what you want to do. And then some trees just have so many little branches that, you know, you'd probably never be able to draw it accurately. You'd have to really do it more impressionist style to get it looking right. Just do a few more so that they each have some branches. What's happening with my pen here? It's kind of bugging out there. That was odd. Okay, something like that will do. And that fills in that negative space in the composition. I felt inside that needed to happen, you know? I could just see that area and needed to be filled. I don't agree that it's necessarily in the perfect spot. Maybe I do want to move it a little bit. I think moving it helps. I'll move it down here more. So it comes in front of the rock a little bit, comes in front of the lake, and comes in front of the mountain, and that really establishes where it's at. I'll go up just a tiny bit. Right there is good. Now, we won't put too much detail on this tree, but we will give it some shading. So we'll turn on Preserve Transparency, and we'll use the Detail Oils brush. We'll pick a light gray. Maybe this will just be a light gray tree. And I'm kind of just sketching in some quick details. You probably can't see very well what I'm doing, but I'm kind of doing strokes that follow the tree, the grain of the tree, just kind of scrubbing back and forth with my pen, and I'm trying to keep the highlights on the side of the tree where it's getting the most light. I find that when I look at trees in the daytime, the smaller branches, to me, I generally just look black to me, and I know that they're not black, but what it is when you're looking at a tree and the sky's behind it, the sky's so bright that it overwhelms your eyes and it silhouettes the tree. So when I'm doing branches, I don't bother really going in and like shading them all. I'll do the bigger ones, but the little small twigs I don't worry about, because to me they just end up looking really dark anyway. So you can do as much detail as you want on yours, but that's just kind of how I like to do mine, is kind of something like that. Put a little bit of a reflected sky color on the bottom edge in a couple spots here. This is like we did on the mountain with the sky color reflecting onto it. We'll zoom out. That looks pretty good. I do want to put some texture on it, so we'll use the sponge for that. Sample this darker color and just lightly go over it and put some texture. You can see what that did there. It's actually kind of hard to see, but it put a little bit of texture over that. So our tree's looking a little more three-dimensional. Again, I think you should spend more time adding branches. Our top of our composition is still lacking something, and maybe I should have put a cloud in there earlier, but again, I didn't really know what I was going to do. So it's not really too late to add a cloud. So let's go ahead and do that. We will go to the canvas layer, which is just everything merged together. We'll make a new layer, clouds. This layer one here, this is just that mist stuff I put down, so we can go ahead and merge that with the background layer by doing a layer. Oops, sometimes this happens and you have to deselect the layer and then select it again. Do a layer drop, just to drop that one layer down. And we'll go back to the clouds layer, pick a cloud color, some kind of light blue like this. Make sure Preserve Transparency is not on. And we will select a screen blend mode. And we'll use the square chalk brush. And we'll throw in a cloud to fill in the composition here. Maybe a couple. So however many we need. The clouds in the distance you want to be thinner and flatter. So you need to watch out for that. Okay, that'll be our general cloud shape. We use the coarse oily blender to blend these up. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Using circular winding strokes just to kind of blend this up a little bit. Get something like that. We're looking pretty good. The distant ones, you can just tease them a little bit. They're going to be so distant they don't really matter too much. And we'll go through with the Diffuse Blur. And we'll blend them a little bit. Using light pressure here, because if you press too hard, that's what's going to happen. They're going to just get destroyed. So light pressure. I'm not doing anything other than just lightly blending it a little bit. The distant ones we can break up a little more. Now let's add some more highlights to this. We'll use almost white, and we'll use the same chalk brush here. Now you'll notice that even though I'm using white, it's still getting tinted by this vignette layer, which is okay. But if that's confusing you, then now you know why. And let's darken the bottom of them a little bit. Just throw in some blue color here. Since we're on a screen blend mode, any darker color you add kind of erases, so you have to watch out for that. We'll blend it some more, turn off preserve transparency. Okay. I think I do want to blend them a little bit more. Take down my paper contrast a little bit. That helps sometimes too. There we go. So you need a good balance of sharp contrast and soft contrast in these clouds. Bigger brush helps sometimes, smaller brush helps other times. You just kind of want them to look organic. Something like that looks a little bit better. And again, blur them a little bit with the Diffuse Blur. And there you go, we got some clouds. Let's zoom out and see what we have here for a composition. Alright, there you go. It's looking like a more or less finished piece. Of course, you could spend a little more time than an hour on it working on yours, but this gives you an idea of how you can get some of these different effects when you're painting landscapes, and how you can just go for it and just paint from your imagination. You know, you don't always have to have a photo, and you don't always have to have an idea, but if you do spend a lot of time doing these types of paintings, you're going to get a lot of practice doing clouds and skies and trees and all of these things together. It's really just good practice, and it's really enjoyable to do, and people really like looking at these paintings. You know, you're kind of creating this whole natural world that doesn't exist. So have fun with this and apply this to your work. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for my next video.